They say a man's legacy is what he leaves behind, but that night in the alley, Silas Thornwood was about to learn. Sometimes legacy is what saves you. August 12th, 1978. Ashford, Tennessee. Behind the Thornwood lumber mill, where the streetlights flicker orange and the shadows stretch long. Silas Thornwood, 68 years old, gray suit, blood on his split lip, pressed his back against the brick wall. Three men in denim and work boots circled him like wolves around a dying elk. The lead thug raised a tire iron. Silas lifted his hand, useless. Then, crack. A baseball spinning through the humid air. Slow motion. It hit the thug's kneecap. He screamed, dropped. The other two spun toward the streetlight, and there she stood. Marjorie Coulter, 11 years old, overalls, braids, arm cocked like a pitcher on the mound, second baseball ready. "My grandpa says you reap what you sow, mister," she said, voice steady as stone. "But tonight, you just gonna reap this fastball if you don't run." The men hesitated. Silas stared at her, shocked, confused, blood dripping from his chin. Silas Thornwood didn't believe in second chances. He gave him once, to his son, and his son died anyway. Dawn broke over the Thornwood estate like it always did, quiet, gold, indifferent. 40 acres of manicured lawn, a Victorian mansion with white columns, and an iron gate at the end of a gravel drive that hadn't been opened for guests in 3 years. Silas sat alone in his study, mahogany desk, taxidermy deer head mounted above the fireplace, and in the corner, an iron safe, rusted, unopened since 1975. He poured black coffee. No sugar, never sugar. His hands were still rough, calloused from the years before the money came, back when he swung an axe himself and hauled timber on his own back. He stared at the framed photo on his desk. His son Marcus, 16 years old, Little League uniform, gap-toothed grin. The photo was face down. It had been face down for 3 years. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked. Outside, mockingbirds called to each other in the magnolia tree. Silas didn't hear them. He was listening to something else. The silence where his son's voice used to be. "Silas." Beatrice Lyle stood in the doorway. 55. Sharp eyes, hair pulled back tight. She'd been his lawyer and assistant for 20 years. Some days, she was the only person who'd speak to him at all. She set a stack of mail on the desk, bills, contracts, and at the bottom, a pale blue envelope with delicate handwriting. Silas didn't touch it. "That's from Penny's mother," Beatrice said quietly. "School tuition's due." Silas sipped his coffee, said nothing. "Silas, the girl is 9 years old." "Her mother married my son for his trust fund," Silas said, voice flat. "She got what she wanted." "And Penny, what did she get?" Silas set the cup down. Hard. Coffee sloshed onto the invoice beneath it. He didn't wipe it up. "She got dealt a bad hand," he said. "Life's full of 'em." Beatrice didn't move, just stared at him with that look she had, half pity, half disappointment, like she was watching a man drown in shallow water. "One day, Silas," she said softly, "you're gonna run out of people to punish." She turned and left. Her heels clicked down the hallway, fading into the belly of the house. Silas stood and walked to the window. Outside, near the edge of the property, a black man in his 70s trimmed the hedges with steady, practiced hands. Elwood Coulter, groundskeeper, 20 years on the estate. Silas watched him work, watched the way his shoulders moved, the care he took with the magnolia branches, and felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. He felt something. He just didn't have a name for it. The memory came unbidden, sharp as broken glass. 1975, County Hospital, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Marcus on a gurney, sheet pulled to his chin, 23 years old, overdose. The doctor's voice, tired and distant. "We did everything we could." Silas stood in the doorway, frozen, couldn't move forward, couldn't move back. He didn't cry, didn't speak, just stared at his son's pale hand hanging off the side of the bed. The nurse had to ask him twice to sign the release forms. Silas blinked. The memory scattered like ash. He turned from the window and walked to the iron safe in the corner. He knelt, knees creaking, and gripped the handle. Pulled. It didn't budge. Rust had sealed it shut. 3 years of neglect, of avoidance, of cowardice. He pulled harder. Nothing. His knuckles went white. His breath came fast. He slammed his fist against the door. The sound echoed through the study. He sat back on his heels, staring at the safe. Inside, it was everything he couldn't say. Marcus's Little League glove, Penny's birth certificate, letters from rehab centers he'd never opened, and a will, unsigned, incomplete, gathering dust. Silas stood slowly. His back ached. His chest felt tight, like someone had their hands around his lungs and wouldn't let go. He walked back to his desk and sat down. Picked up the pale blue envelope from Penny's mother, held it, didn't open it, just added it to the pile. 20 unopened letters sat on the credenza behind him, stacked like tombstones. Outside, Elwood Coulter paused his work and wiped sweat from his brow. For just a moment, he glanced toward the big house on the hill. Silas saw him through the window. Their eyes met. Elwood looked away first. Silas sat back in his chair and stared at the iron safe. Inside that safe was everything Silas couldn't say, a voice would later recall, and it'd stay locked till a little girl with a fastball came along. But Silas didn't know that yet. He just knew he was alone, and alone was all he deserved. Marjorie Coulter didn't have much, but she had an arm like a cannon, and in a world that tried to make her small, that arm made her dangerous. Dawn came to the Coulter cottage the way it always did, slow, pink, and carrying the smell of wood smoke. The cottage sat at the edge of Silas Thornwood's estate, small and weathered, with a sagging porch and a roof that leaked when the rain came hard. But it was theirs. Elwood had worked 20 years to keep it that way. Midge stood in the yard, barefoot in the dew-wet grass. She wore faded overalls 2 sizes too big and a Memphis Red Sox cap, her grandfather's from 1947. In her right hand, a scuffed baseball. On the cottage wall, a chalk strike zone, edges smudged from 100 mornings just like this one. She wound up, kicked her leg, threw, thwack, dead center. She picked up another ball from the wooden crate at her feet, wound up again, thwack, same spot. The paint on the wall had chipped away where she hit it over and over, revealing the bare wood underneath. A knot in the grain, dark and hard. She aimed for it every time. Thwack. "You hit that same knot 10 times, baby girl," Elwood said from the porch. He stood in the doorway, thin and tall, wiping his hands on a rag. His hair was gray and cropped close, his face lined with years of sun and quiet endurance. "You proving something?" "Just practicing," Midge said, winding up again. "Practice is preparation," Elwood said, stepping down onto the grass. "What you preparing for?" Midge threw. Thwack. 11. "I don't know yet." Elwood walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, dark eyes serious, too serious for 11. "Power ain't in the arm, Midge," he said quietly. "It's here." He tapped her chest, just over her heart. "You gotta mean it, every throw." "What if I miss?" Elwood smiled, soft and sad. "Then you mean it again." They stood there for a moment, the morning air thick with humidity and the distant crow of a rooster. Inside, something sizzled on the stove. Catfish, probably, left over from last night. Midge could hear the oil popping. She sat down on the porch steps. Elwood sat beside her, his knees cracking as he lowered himself down. "Grandpa," Midge said quietly, "Mama died when I was born, right?" Elwood nodded. "Complications. But she held you first. Made me promise to teach you how to stand tall." "You think she'd be proud?" Elwood looked at her for a long time. "Baby, you throw like you got something to prove. She'd be proud. But I want you to throw like you got nothing to lose." Midge didn't understand that. Not yet. But she nodded anyway. She looked toward the big house on the hill, the Thornwood estate, white and gleaming in the morning light. It looked like something from a magazine, clean, perfect, untouchable. Why, Mr. Thornwood never talked to you? Midge asked. You work for him every day. Elwood was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. Some men pay you to disappear, he said, even when you're right in front of them. That ain't right. No, Elwood said. But right don't always win, baby. That's why we practice. They sat in silence for a while. Then Elwood stood and motioned for her to follow. They walked behind the cottage, through the tall grass, to the creek bed. Or what used to be a creek. Now it was just cracked mud, dry as bone. Dead fish skeletons scattered along the edges, bleached white by the sun. Rusted cans and broken glass half buried in the dirt. The air smelled faintly of chemicals, something sharp and wrong. Elwood stopped at the edge and closed his eyes. This creek used to run clear as glass, he said quietly. My daddy caught catfish here every Sunday. Then the mill came. Mr. Thornwood's mill? Elwood nodded. Chemicals from the timber treatment killed everything, fish, frogs, hope. Midge knelt down and touched the cracked earth. It crumbled under her fingers, turned to powder. She looked up at her grandfather. His eyes were still closed, like he was praying or mourning. Grandpa, she said softly, you mad at him? Elwood opened his eyes, looked down at her. Mad don't change nothin', he said. But Justice got a long memory. Midge picked up a smooth stone from the creek bed. It was gray and round, worn down by water that no longer flowed. She turned it over in her hand, feeling its weight. Then she slipped it into her pocket. She didn't know why, just felt like she should keep it. Elwood watched her, didn't say anything, just placed a hand on her head, gentle, and they walked back to the cottage together. Behind them, the dried creek lay silent in the sun, waiting. August 12, 1978. Full moon, humidity like a wet blanket. Silas Thornwood made one mistake that night. He walked alone. 10:47 p.m. The Thornwood lumber mill sat quiet in downtown Ashford, its loading docks empty, the smell of fresh-cut pine hanging in the air like a ghost. Silas pushed through the side door, briefcase in hand, tie loosened, gray suit rumpled from a long day of contracts and cold coffee. His Lincoln Continental was parked 2 blocks away. He always parked far, told himself it was to clear his head. Truth was, he just didn't want to go home. The street was empty. Sodium streetlights buzzed overhead, casting everything in sick orange. Moths circled the bulbs. Somewhere down the block, a jukebox played Patsy Cline, muffled and distant. Silas's leather shoes clicked on the gravel. He turned into the alley. It was a shortcut. Narrow, brick walls on both sides, dumpsters overflowing, a rusted fire escape zigzagging up the side of the old textile building. He'd walked it 100 times. But tonight, 3 men stepped out from the shadows. Silas stopped. The lead thug was maybe 30, denim jacket, work boots, tire iron hanging loose in his right hand. Behind him, 2 more. One wiry with a switchblade, the other heavy-set with brass knuckles that caught the streetlight like dirty gold. Mr. Thornwood, the lead thug said, voice lazy, confident. We got a message from your nephew. Silas's jaw tightened. He didn't move. Dalton sent you? His voice was calm, too calm. Tell him I don't negotiate with cowards. The lead thug smiled, took a step closer. He ain't negotiating, he said. He's reminding you. Family comes first. Family's earned, Silas said coldly. Not inherited. The thug's smile faded. Then let's earn your attention. It happened fast. The heavy-set one shoved Silas hard against the brick. His briefcase clattered to the ground, papers spilling into a puddle. The lead thug swung the tire iron. Silas tried to block it, took a punch to the ribs instead. Air left his lungs in a rush. He gasped, stumbled, dropped to one knee. Blood filled his mouth, copper, warm. The wiry one laughed, high and sharp. Old man can't even stand up. The tire iron rose again. Silas looked up at it, silhouetted against the flickering streetlight. And in that moment he thought of Marcus. Thought of the hospital. Thought of all the times he should have been there and wasn't. This is how it ends, he thought. Alone in an alley, just like I deserve. Then, crack. A sound like a gunshot. Sharp, clean. The lead thug screamed. His knee buckled. He collapsed, tire iron clattering away, hands clutching his leg. The other two spun toward the sound, confused, adrenaline wild. 30 feet away, under the cone of a streetlight, stood a little girl, overalls, braids, Red Sox cap, Marjorie Coulter. She held a baseball in her right hand. Her arm was cocked, elbow high, like a pitcher on the mound in the bottom of the ninth. "My grandpa says you reap what you sow, mister," she said. Her voice didn't waver, didn't shake. "But tonight, you just gonna reap this fastball if you don't run." The wiry thug laughed nervously. "It's a kid." Midge wound up. "A kid with good aim." She threw. Thwack. Hit the wiry one square in the shoulder. He yelped, dropped the switchblade, stumbled backward into the dumpster. The heavy-set thug looked at the lead thug, still writhing on the ground, looked at Midge. She pulled a third baseball from her pocket. "I got 6 more," she said calmly. "Y'all want to see if I miss?" The heavy-set one didn't wait. He grabbed the wiry thug by the collar and hauled him up. "Man, let's go." They ran, limping, clutching injuries. Their boots echoed down the alley and faded into the night. Silence, just the hum of the streetlight, the distant jukebox, Silas's ragged breathing. Midge walked over slowly, stood in front of him. He was still on his knees, blood dripping from his split lip, staring at her like she'd appeared out of thin air. "Who?" His voice cracked. "Who are you?" "Marjorie Coulter," she said. "My grandpa Elwood works for you." Silas blinked. "Elwood's granddaughter?" She nodded, knelt down beside him. Up close, he could see she was just a kid, skinny, dirt under her nails, a small scar on her chin. "You okay, mister?" Silas touched his lip. Winced. I think so." "You shouldn't walk alone at night," Midge said matter-of-factly. "Bad people out here." Silas almost laughed. It hurt. "I'm learning that." Midge stood and held out her hand. He stared at it for a moment, this small, calloused hand extended to him in the dark, and then he took it. She helped him to his feet. He was 200 pounds, 6 feet tall, and she was 11 years old, but somehow she held him steady. "I'll walk you to your car," she said. "You don't have to—" "Grandpa says you don't let a man get kicked when he's down." She looked up at him, eyes serious. "Even if he deserves it." Silas stopped, looked at her. "Even if he deserves it?" "That's what he said. I don't know what he meant." Silas's throat tightened. "I do," he whispered. They walked out of the alley together. Silas leaned on her more than he wanted to admit. Behind them, a baseball rolled across the pavement, stopping in a puddle that reflected the moon. And somewhere in the distance, a voice that hadn't spoken yet whispered. Silas didn't know it yet, but that fastball just cracked open 30 years of concrete around his heart. Silas spent his whole life knowing the price of everything and the value of nothing. But that night, a little girl made him wonder, what's a life worth? Morning came slow and gray. Silas sat at his desk, ribs taped beneath his shirt, split lips scabbed over. He'd cleaned himself up in the mill bathroom before driving home, didn't want the staff asking questions, didn't want anyone knowing he'd been weak, but Beatrice knew. She always knew. She stood in the doorway now, arms crossed, a first aid kit in one hand and disappointment written all over her face. "You should press charges," she said. Silas didn't look up. "Against who? 3 men I didn't see clearly?" "You know who sent them." Silas's jaw tightened. "Dalton made his move. Now it's my turn." "And the girl who saved you?" Silas paused, set down his pen. "Elwood's granddaughter." Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "You didn't even know he had one." "I don't make it my business to know the help's personal lives." Beatrice stepped into the room, closed the door behind her. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, sharp. "That help has worked here 20 years, Silas, and his granddaughter saved your life." Silas looked away, stared at the iron safe in the corner. "Then I owe her," he said quietly. The words tasted strange in his mouth. "Oh." Silas Thornwood didn't owe anyone. He paid people, employees, lawyers, servants. Debts were settled with checks, signed and forgotten. But this was different. He kept seeing her face. The way she stood under that streetlight, calm as Sunday morning, arm cocked like she'd done it 1,000 times. The precision of her throw, the steadiness in her voice. Even if he deserves it. Silas rubbed his face, winced when his fingers brushed the cut on his lip. "Pull Elwood's file," he said. Beatrice blinked. "What?" "His employment file. I want to see it." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded and left. Silas stood and walked to the window. Outside, Elwood was trimming the magnolia tree near the cottage, his movements slow and practiced. Midge stood beside him, handing him tools from a wooden box. They worked in comfortable silence, the way people do when words aren't necessary. As Silas watched them, really watched them, for the first time in 20 years, Beatrice returned with a manila folder, set it on the desk without a word. Silas hesitated, then opened it. Name: Elwood Coulter. Employed, June 1958. Position: groundskeeper. Previous occupation: professional baseball, Memphis Red Sox, Negro League, 1944 to 1950. Reason for departure: league disbanded. Blacklisted after protesting pay inequality. Family: wife deceased, 1967, daughter deceased, 1967, childbirth complications. Granddaughter: Marjorie Coulter, DOB, April 1967. Silas stared at the words, professional baseball. He flipped the page. Clipped to the back was a black and white photograph. A young Elwood in uniform, mid-pitch, leg kicked high, face fierce with concentration. The year scrawled at the bottom, 1947. "He was a ball player," Silas said quietly. "One of the best," Beatrice replied, "before the leagues folded." "Why didn't I know this?" Beatrice's voice was gentle, almost sad. "Because you never asked." Silas sat down heavily, stared at the photo. At this man, who had worked his land, trimmed his trees, lived in his cottage for 2 decades. And Silas had never once wondered who he was, what he'd lost, what he'd been. He closed the file, pressed his palms flat against the desk. "I'm going to thank her," he said. Beatrice looked surprised. "You? Saying thank you?" "Don't make a thing of it." He stood, grabbed his jacket, paused at the door. "Beatrice?" "Yes?" "Do you think—" He stopped, struggled with the words. "Do you think it's too late? To be different?" She looked at him for a long time, then smiled, small and sad. "I think it's only too late when you stop trying." Silas nodded, left. Behind him, the iron safe sat in the corner, still locked, still waiting. But as he walked down the gravel path toward the Coulter cottage, toward the man he'd ignored and the girl who'd saved him, something inside Silas Thornwood began to shift. Not open, not yet, but shift. Like rust flaking off a hinge, like the first crack in a dam that's been holding back 30 years of silence. He didn't know it yet, but that simple walk across his own property to knock on a door he'd never knocked on before, was the beginning of everything, the beginning of the end of being alone. You can live next to a man for 20 years and never see him. That's what Silas learned the day he knocked on Elwood Coulter's door. The afternoon sun hung low and heavy, turning everything gold. Silas walked the gravel path from the main house to the cottage, first time in 20 years. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets. His jaw was tight, nervous. A 68-year-old man who'd faced down union strikes and recessions, nervous about knocking on a door. The cottage looked smaller up close, weathered clapboard siding, sagging porch, but it was tidy. Flower boxes under the windows, geraniums blooming red. Midge's chalk strike zone still visible on the wall. The paint chipped away where she'd hit the same spot over and over. Silas stood at the bottom of the porch steps, raised his hand, knocked, footsteps inside. The door opened. Elwood stood there, dish towel in his hands. For a moment, neither man spoke, just looked at each other across the threshold. Employer and employee, stranger and stranger. "Mr. Thornwood," Elwood said finally. His voice was steady. "Careful." Silas cleared his throat. "Elwood, I came to thank your granddaughter. She's inside, doing homework. May I—" Silas hesitated. "May I come in?" Elwood's eyes searched his face. A long pause. Then he stepped aside. "Course." The inside of the cottage was small but clean. Wood stove in the corner, its iron surface scrubbed. A table with 2 chairs, mismatched but sturdy. Midge sat at the table, math book open, pencil in hand. She looked up when Silas entered. "Mr. Thornwood." "Marjorie." He nodded. "Folks call me Midge." Silas shifted his weight. "Midge, I wanted to thank you for last night." She set down her pencil. "You already thanked me, in the alley. Words aren't enough. Grandpa says words are plenty, long as you mean 'em." Silas reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope. Cash. $500. He held it out. "I'd like to give you something. For your trouble." Midge didn't take it, just looked at it, then at him. "I don't want money." Silas blinked. "Everyone wants money." Elwood spoke from the doorway, voice quiet. "Not everyone, Mr. Thornwood." Silas turned. "Then what do you want?" Midge stood, walked to the sink, filled a tin cup with water from the tap, walked back and held it out to him. "I want you to drink some water." Silas stared at the cup, confused. "What?" "Just drink it." He took the cup, looked at Elwood. Elwood's face was unreadable. Silas raised the cup to his lips and drank. The taste hit him immediately. Rust, something chemical, bitter and wrong. He coughed, set the cup down hard on the table. What is this?" Elwood stepped forward. "That's the water my grandbaby bathes in, Mr. Thornwood. You taste it now?" Silas's face went pale. "The creek. Your mill's been dumping treatment chemicals into that creek for 30 years, Elwood said. His voice was calm, too calm. "Killed the fish, poisoned the groundwater. We've been drinking it every day." Silas felt something cold settle in his stomach. "The EPA cleared us. Money clears a lot of things." Elwood cut him off, still calm. "Don't make 'em right." Silence. Silas looked at Midge. She was watching him, not with anger, not with accusation. Something worse. Pity. "I didn't save you for money, mister," she said quietly. "I saved you 'cause Grandpa taught me. You don't let a man get kicked when he's down." "But maybe you could stop kicking us while we're down too." Silas's throat closed. His hands started to shake. He sat down at the table, uninvited, and put his head in his hands. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You didn't ask," Elwood said. Silas looked up. His eyes were wet. "My son, Marcus. He died 3 years ago. Overdose. And I blamed everyone but myself. His mother. His friends. God." His voice cracked. "But the truth is, I taught him to be alone, to not need anybody, and it killed him." Midge's voice was soft. "That why you're alone too?" Silas stared at her. This 11-year-old girl who saw straight through him. "Yeah, baby," he said. "That's why." Elwood walked to the counter, picked up a jug of store-bought water, the kind they had to drive into town to buy because their own tap was poison. He poured a cup, set it in front of Silas. "This is what it should taste like." Silas drank. It was clean, pure, cold. He closed his eyes. "I'll fix the creek," he said. Elwood nodded slowly. "Words are plenty, Mr. Thornwood, long as you mean 'em." Silas stood. His legs felt unsteady. He shook Elwood's hand. First time in 20 years. The older man's grip was firm, strong. Silas nodded to Midge, walked to the door, stopped. "Thank you," he said. For the water. For... for the truth. He walked out into the fading sunlight. Behind him, Midge looked up at her grandfather. You think he means it? Elwood watched Silas walk back toward the big house, shoulders hunched, hands in his pockets. I think he's starting to, Elwood said quietly. And somewhere, in the space between the cottage and the mansion, something shifted. Sometimes a man's got to taste his own poison before he stops serving it to others. Dalton Vance believed in one thing, blood, and he was about to bet everything on it. 2 weeks after the alley, Dalton sat in a cramped office at the Ashford County Courthouse, slick hair combed back, cheap suit pulled tight across his shoulders. Across from him, a lawyer named Griffith, 40, ambitious, the kind of man who'd sell his mother if the price was right. Griffith slid a document across the desk. Petition for guardianship. Silas Thornwood, unfit due to diminished mental capacity. You sure about this? Griffith asked, tapping his pen against the paper. Silas is sharp. Dalton leaned back, smiled. He's 68, alone, getting attacked in alleys, refusing medical care. He shrugged. That's not sharp. That's a man losing his grip. And if it doesn't work? Dalton's smile faded. It'll work. Hired thugs couldn't scare him, so we'll let the law do it. Griffith signed the bottom of the petition. Your funeral. Dalton stood, straightened his jacket. No, he said. His. Silas received the summons 3 days later. Beatrice brought it to his study, her face tight with anger. She dropped it on his desk like it was on fire. He's claiming you're unfit to manage your affairs, she said. Wants himself appointed guardian. Silas read the document slowly. His hands didn't shake, but his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. On what grounds? Erratic behavior, isolation, refusing medical care after the attack. Beatrice crossed her arms. He's painting you as a danger to yourself. Silas set the paper down, laughed once, sharp and bitter. That's not dementia, that's called being stubborn. Judge won't see the difference if Dalton's lawyer is good. Silas looked up at her. Then we better be better. They prepared for a week. Beatrice laid out the strategy. Character witnesses, medical records, proof of competence. But every name she suggested, business associates, old friends, Silas shot down. Henderson, haven't spoken to him in 5 years. What about Judge Morris? You played golf with him? Once. In 1972, Beatrice slammed her folder shut. Silas, they'll argue you're a recluse. No social ties, no family engagement. You need people. I have employees. Employees aren't family. What about Penny? Beatrice's voice softened. You haven't seen her in 3 years. Silas deflated, sank back in his chair, stared at the window. Outside, Elwood and Midge were playing catch, the baseball arcing back and forth between them in the afternoon light. What if... Silas hesitated. What if I asked them? Beatrice followed his gaze. Elwood? He's an employee, Silas. He's the only person who's told me the truth in 20 years. Beatrice studied him, then nodded, then asked. Evening. Silas walked to the cottage. Elwood sat on the porch, oiling his old glove, the same one from the photograph, leather cracked and dark with age. Elwood, Silas said, I need a favor. Elwood looked up, waited. My nephew's taking me to court. Wants to declare me unfit. Silas's voice was steady, but his hands were in his pockets, clenched. I need someone to speak for me. Elwood set down the glove. You want me to lie? No. Silas shook his head. I want you to tell the truth. And what's the truth, Mr. Thornwood? Silas sat down on the porch steps, took a breath. The truth is, I'm a stubborn old fool who built walls so high I couldn't see over 'em, but I'm trying to tear 'em down. He looked up. And I need help. Elwood studied him for a long time. Why me? Because you're the only man I trust. The words hung in the air between them. Elwood nodded slowly. All right. The courthouse was packed. Dalton sat at one table with Griffith, smug and confident. Silas sat at the other with Beatrice, bruised ribs still aching beneath his shirt. Judge Harmon, stern, 60, reading glasses perched on his nose, banged his gavel. Mr. Vance claims Mr. Thornwood is a danger to himself. Isolated. Paranoid. Refuses medical care. He looked at Silas. Do you have witnesses? I do, Your Honor. Call them. Elwood took the stand. Sworn in. Griffith circled him like a shark. Mr. Coulter, how long have you worked for Silas Thornwood? 20 years? In those 20 years, has he ever shown concern for your well-being? Elwood paused. Not until recently. Griffith smirked. So for 20 years, he ignored you? He paid me, on time, every week. But no personal connection? No. Not until 3 weeks ago. And what changed 3 weeks ago? Elwood looked directly at Silas. He started asking questions. Griffith turned to the judge. Your Honor, this proves— I'm not finished, Elwood said. The courtroom went silent. For 20 years, I worked his land, trimmed his trees, fixed his fences. And yeah, he never asked my name, never asked where I came from. Elwood's voice was steady, strong. But 3 weeks ago, his nephew sent men to kill him in an alley. And my granddaughter saved his life. And the next day, he came to my door. First time in 20 years. He leaned forward. He drank poisoned water from my tap. He listened. He apologized. And he promised to fix what he broke. Now, I don't know if that's dementia, Your Honor, but it sounds to me like a man finally waking up. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. I'd like to call my next witness, Beatrice said. Marjorie Coulter. Midge took the stand. She looked small in the chair, feet barely touching the floor, but her voice was clear. Midge, Beatrice said gently. Do you know Mr. Thornwood? Yes, ma'am. How? I saved him from 3 men in an alley. Gasps. Whispers. And after that, did he seem confused? Disoriented? No, ma'am. Midge shook her head. He remembered my name. He remembered my grandpa played for the Memphis Red Sox in 1947. If that's dementia, then half this town's got it. Laughter erupted. Judge Harmon banged his gavel, but he was smiling. Griffith stood. Your Honor, this is a child. Let her finish, the judge said. Beatrice stepped closer. Midge, why did you help Mr. Thornwood that night? Because my grandpa taught me, you don't let a man get kicked when he's down. Even if that man never helped you? Midge looked at Silas. Even then, 'cause maybe he just needed someone to show him how. Silence. Judge Harmon removed his glasses, leaned forward. Mr. Vance, your petition is denied. Mr. Thornwood may be stubborn, but he's not incapacitated. He looked at Silas. In fact, he seems to be learning. Case dismissed. Dalton shot to his feet. This isn't over. Yes, the judge said coldly. It is. Bailiff, escort Mr. Vance out. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Silas stood with Beatrice, Elwood, and Midge. You didn't have to do that, Silas said to Midge. Yes, I did. Why? 'Cause you're trying, and that's more than most people do. Silas knelt, eye level with her. What do you want, Midge? Really, I owe you. She looked at him, serious. I want the creek back. Silas nodded slowly. Then you'll have it. Across the street, Dalton watched from beside his truck. Jaw clenched, fists tight. Blood don't always win, but it don't forgive neither. Some men lock away their money. Silas Thornwood locked away his heart. Late September. The air had turned cool, carrying the smell of rain and dying leaves. Silas sat in his study, alone, the lamp on his desk casting long shadows across the walls. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Autumn rain tapped against the windows like fingernails. Beatrice stood beside him with a toolkit, WD-40, flathead screwdriver, pliers. You sure about this? She asked. Once it's open? Silas stared at the iron safe in the corner. 3 years. Rusted shut. Holding everything he couldn't face. I need to see what's inside. You've had 20 years to open it. I wasn't ready. Beatrice knelt beside the safe, sprayed WD-40 into the lock mechanism. Rust flaked away, orange and brittle. She worked the screwdriver carefully, coaxing the tumblers. The mechanism groaned. Then, click, the door swung open. Dust motes swirled in the lamplight. The smell of old paper and leather filled the room, musty and sad. Silas knelt beside Beatrice. His hands trembled as he reached inside. He pulled out a baseball glove first. Small, child-sized, worn leather, dark with sweat and time. Inside, written in black Sharpie, Marcus Thornwood, 1965. Silas held it like it might crumble, like it might disappear. His little league glove, he whispered. Next, a stack of papers. He unfolded the first one, a birth certificate. Penelope Grace Thornwood, born April 14, 1969. His granddaughter, 9 years old now, a stranger. Beneath that, a stack of letters. Envelopes yellowed with age, stamps from 1974, 1975. The return address, Pine Ridge Rehabilitation Center. Silas's breath caught. I couldn't, his voice cracked. I couldn't throw them away, but I couldn't look at them either. So you locked them up, Beatrice said softly. I locked me up. Silas opened one of the letters, hands shaking. The handwriting was messy, shaky. Marcus's handwriting. Dad, I know you're busy. I know you're disappointed, but I'm trying. They say I need to write to someone who matters. You're the only one I've got. Please write back. Please. Marcus. Silas closed his eyes. Tears spilled down his cheeks, hot and sudden. I never opened them, he whispered. I thought, if I didn't read them, it meant he didn't need me. Beatrice placed a hand on his shoulder, said nothing, just stayed. Silas reached deeper into the safe, pulled out a document, unfolded it, a will, blank, unsigned. Dated June 1975, the day after Marcus died. I was going to leave everything to Marcus, Silas said, but he died before I could sign it, so I just left it blank. For 3 years? I didn't know who to leave it to. His voice was hollow. Dalton? He's a vulture. Penny? Her mother would just take it. I built this empire, and I got no one to give it to. Beatrice's voice was gentle. That's not true. Silas looked up at her. Who then? The people who showed up, Elwood, Midge, even Penny, if you'd let her. They're not blood. Blood didn't show up at that courthouse, Silas. They did. Silas sat back on his heels, stared at the contents of the safe spread across the floor. A glove, a birth certificate, unopened letters, an unsigned will, the ruins of a life he'd never lived. He reached back into the safe one last time, pulled out a small wooden box, opened it. Inside, a porcelain doll, faded pink dress, missing one shoe. The paint on her face was chipped, but her eyes were still bright. Silas held it carefully. Penny's doll, he whispered. Marcus gave it to her when she was 3. She left it here the last time they visited. I was going to mail it, but I never did. Beatrice's voice was soft. Call her, Silas. She doesn't want to hear from me. You don't know that. Silas stood, walked to his desk, stared at the rotary phone like it was a loaded gun. Then he picked it up, dialed. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. A woman's voice answered, cold, clipped. Thornwood residence. Helen. Silas's voice was rough. It's Silas. Silence. Then, what do you want? I want to talk to Penny. She doesn't need your money. I'm not offering money. Silas closed his eyes. I'm asking if she'd come visit for Thanksgiving. A long pause. Rain drummed against the window. Why now? Helen's voice was suspicious. Because I'm running out of time to be a grandfather. Silence stretched. Silas held his breath. If I let her come, Helen said slowly, you don't get to hurt her. You don't get to disappear again. I won't. I'll think about it. The line went dead. Silas set the phone down, stood there, staring at nothing. Then he picked up the doll, placed it on his desk next to the framed photo of Marcus, which he turned face up for the first time in 3 years. Father and son, looking at each other across the years. Beatrice stood beside him. "You need to finish that will." Silas nodded. "I know." "Who are you naming?" He looked at the contents of the safe, at Marcus's glove, at Penny's doll, at the letters he should have read. "The ones who earned it," he said quietly. Beatrice handed him a pen. Silas sat down, pulled the blank will toward him, stared at the empty line where the beneficiary's name should go. His hand hovered over the paper. A man's legacy ain't written in ink. It's written in who shows up when the ink runs dry. And for the first time in 3 years, Silas Thornwood knew exactly what to write. Dalton Vance lost in court, so he stopped playing by the rules. October 28, 1978. 3 days before Thanksgiving. The sun hung low and red over the Thornwood estate, turning the magnolia tree into a silhouette, black against fire. Elwood and Midge raked leaves into piles near the cottage, the air sharp with the smell of autumn and wood smoke. Inside the main house, Silas sat at his desk with Beatrice, signing the new will. His hand was steady, his mind was clear. For the first time in years, he knew exactly what he was doing. Then the sound of tires on gravel. Fast. Angry. Midge looked up from her rake. A black pickup truck roared up the drive, skidding to a stop near the magnolia tree. The door flew open. Dalton stumbled out, drunk, unsteady, shirt untucked. Behind him, another man climbed out of the passenger side, big, limping. The same thug from the alley, the one Midge had hit in the knee. He carried a crowbar. Elwood stepped in front of Midge. "Go inside, baby. Grandpa, now." Midge hesitated, then ran toward the cottage, glancing back over her shoulder. Dalton staggered toward Elwood, pointing a shaking finger. "Where's my uncle?" Elwood's voice was calm, steady. "He's busy. I'm done waiting." Dalton's words slurred. "That old man's gonna sign over the mill, or I'm taking it." "You lost in court," Elwood said. "Go home." Dalton spat into the grass, stepped closer, jabbed Elwood's chest with his finger. "Court don't mean nothing. Blood does. And you," he shoved Elwood hard. "You're just the help." Elwood didn't stumble, didn't flinch, just stood his ground. The thug stepped forward, crowbar swinging loose in his hand. "Where's the girl?" His voice was a growl. "The one who broke my knee." Elwood's jaw tightened. "You ain't touching her. I'm gonna make her pay." Elwood stepped closer, looked the thug dead in the eye. "Then you're gonna have to go through me." The front door of the main house slammed open. Silas strode out, no jacket, sleeves rolled to his elbows, jaw set. Beatrice was right behind him, phone already in her hand. "Dalton," Silas's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Get off my property." Dalton turned, swaying, sneered. "Your property? For how long? You're old, alone, and I'm the only blood you got left." "Blood don't mean loyalty," Silas said coldly. "You proved that." "Then who's gonna get it?" Dalton pointed at Elwood. "Him? Some washed-up ball player?" He laughed, bitter and sharp. "Or his little brat?" Silas's voice dropped. "Dangerous. Quiet. That little brat saved my life. You tried to take it. Prove it." Silas reached into his pocket, pulled out the signed will, held it up. "I just signed it." Beatrice witnessed. "Half the estate goes to Creek Restoration, a quarter to Penny's Education Trust." He looked at Elwood, then toward the cottage where Midge was peeking through the window. "And the rest, to the Coulter family, for 20 years of service and 1 night of courage." Dalton's face went white, then red. His hands shook. "You can't." "I already did." Dalton lunged. He came at Silas with both hands, wild and desperate. Elwood stepped between them, shoved Dalton back. The thug swung the crowbar, aimed at Elwood's head. Elwood ducked, but it clipped his shoulder. He grunted, dropped to one knee. "Grandpa!" Midge burst out of the cottage, baseball in her hand. She didn't think, didn't hesitate, just wound up and threw. Crack! The ball hit the thug square in the jaw. His head snapped back. He dropped the crowbar, stumbled, collapsed onto the grass, groaning. Dalton backed away, eyes wild, terrified. "You're all crazy." "And you're trespassing," Silas said. "Leave, now, or I call the sheriff and press charges for assault." Beatrice held up the phone. "Already dialing." Dalton grabbed the thug by the collar, hauled him to his feet. They stumbled to the truck, tires spinning as they tore down the drive and disappeared into the dusk. Silence. Midge ran to Elwood. He was holding his shoulder, wincing, but he smiled at her. "You okay?" "I'm okay, baby girl." He touched her cheek. "You threw a strike." Silas knelt beside them. "Elwood, I'm sorry. This is my fault." "No." Elwood's voice was firm. "It's Dalton's fault. You just gotta finish it." "How?" Elwood looked him in the eye. "By not backing down." Silas helped Elwood to his feet. The three of them stood together. Silas, Elwood, Midge, silhouetted against the dying light. Silas looked at Midge. "Thank you, again." She grinned, tired but proud. "You keep getting in trouble, mister." Silas almost laughed. "I know. I'm working on it." Beatrice approached, holding the will. There was a smudge of blood on the corner, Elwood's, from where Silas had gripped it with his hand after helping him. "3 days till Thanksgiving," she said quietly. Silas nodded, looked at the will, at the blood. 3 days to see if family you choose is stronger than family you're born into. 3 days to find out if words could become truth. 3 days to stop being alone. Thanksgiving 1978. The Thornwood estate had never seen a table so full, or a man so scared. Morning came cold and bright. Frost clung to the grass, turning the estate silver in the early light. Inside the kitchen, staff bustled, Beatrice directing everyone like a general. Turkey in the oven, pies cooling on the counter, the smell of sage and butter filling every room. Silas paced the dining room. The table was set for 5, fine china, silver, candles waiting to be lit. He'd never used this table, not once, not even when Marcus was alive. "She'll come," Beatrice said from the doorway. Silas stopped pacing. "You don't know that?" "Helen called yesterday, said Penny's excited." Silas ran a hand through his hair. "What if I say the wrong thing? What if she hates me?" Beatrice walked over, straightened his collar. "Then you apologize, and you try again." Silas nodded, but his hand still trembled. Noon. A station wagon pulled up the drive, gravel crunching under the tires. Silas stood on the porch, hands shoved deep in his pockets, trying not to look as terrified as he felt. The driver's door opened. Helen stepped out, 30, guarded, dark hair pulled back. She didn't smile. Then the passenger door opened, and there she was, Penny, 9 years old. Dark curls, shy eyes, a small suitcase clutched in both hands. She wore a blue dress and white tights, shoes polished. She looked up at the house, this enormous, unfamiliar house, and then at the old man on the porch. Silas's throat closed. Helen walked around the car, placed a hand on Penny's shoulder. 2 days, she said to Silas. Her voice was firm, final. "Then we leave." "Thank you," Silas said quietly. Helen nodded, looked down at Penny. "Go on, baby." Penny walked slowly up the steps, stopped in front of Silas. He knelt, eye level, trying to smile, trying not to cry. "Hi, Penny." "Hi." Her voice was small. Silas reached into his jacket, pulled out the porcelain doll, cleaned, repaired, the missing shoe replaced. Penny gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth. "My doll! I thought I lost her." "She's been waiting for you," Silas said. Penny took the doll carefully, held it like it was made of glass. Then, without warning, she stepped forward and hugged Silas. He froze. Then his arms came up, slow and uncertain, and wrapped around her. She was so small, so warm. He closed his eyes and let the tears fall. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry." Penny pulled back, looked up at him with those serious eyes. "It's okay, Grandpa. Grandpa." First time he'd ever heard her say it. Silas covered his mouth, couldn't speak, just nodded. Inside, the dining room glowed. 5 chairs, 5 plates. Silas at the head, Penny to his right, Elwood to his left, shoulder bandaged but steady, Midge beside Elwood, Beatrice at the far end. Helen had declined to stay, said she'd pick Penny up in 2 days. But Silas saw the way she looked at him before she left. Less anger, more caution. Hope, maybe. The table was covered. Turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, green beans, rolls, pie. More food than 5 people could ever eat. But it felt right. Full. Silas stood, cleared his throat. Everyone looked at him. He faltered. I'm not good at this. But Beatrice says I should try. Beatrice smiled. You're doing fine. Silas looked around the table, at each face. I spent 50 years building walls, he said. Kept people out, kept myself in, told myself it was protection. But it was just fear. He looked at Elwood. Elwood, you worked for me 20 years. I never once asked how you were, never asked about your life. I'm sorry. Elwood nodded slowly. I know. Silas turned to Midge. Midge, you saved my life. Twice. I didn't deserve it, but I'm grateful. Midge grinned. You're welcome, mister. Then Silas looked at Penny. His voice cracked. Penny, I wasn't there for your daddy. I wasn't there for you. But if you'll let me. He paused, swallowed. I'd like to try now. Penny's voice was soft, steady. Okay, Grandpa. Silas pressed his hand to his mouth. Tears streamed down his face. He nodded, unable to speak. They ate. Stories were told. Elwood talked about the Negro Leagues, about pitching in front of 10,000 people. Midge showed Penny the chalk strike zone on the cottage wall. Beatrice teased Silas about his terrible poker face in court. Laughter, real laughter. The house hadn't heard it in years. After dinner, as the sun sank low, they walked to the creek. Silas, Elwood, Midge, and Penny. The ground was damp, the air cool. The creek bed was still dry, but not for long. I signed the contract this morning, Silas said. $500,000 to the county for creek restoration. Cleanup starts in January. Elwood was quiet for a moment, then, thank you. It's not enough, Silas said, but it's a start. Midge looked up. Will the fish come back? Silas nodded. Yeah, baby, the fish'll come back. Midge pulled a baseball from her pocket, held it out to Penny. You want to learn to throw? Penny looked uncertain. I don't know how. I'll teach you. They played catch, Midge coaching, Penny learning. Her first throws were clumsy, wild, but Midge was patient, kind, and slowly Penny started to smile. Elwood and Silas stood side by side, watching. You did good, Mr. Thornwood, Elwood said quietly. Silas looked at him. Call me Silas. Elwood met his eyes. Nodded. Silas. The sun turned everything gold. 4 figures silhouetted against the sky. The dried creek in the foreground. The magnolia tree above them. Laughter echoing across the estate. And somewhere, in the space between the past and the future, a man who'd spent his whole life alone finally understood what it meant to be found. They say a man's legacy is what he leaves behind. But that day, Silas Thornwood learned, legacy ain't what you leave, it's who you bring with you. Well, friend, that's the story of how a fastball changed a will and a life. You know, folks always ask me, was it real? Did it really happen that way? And I tell them, does it matter? Truth is, every man who builds walls eventually meets someone brave enough to knock him down. For Silas, it was an 11-year-old girl with a baseball and a heart bigger than his whole estate. Silas Thornwood died 5 years later. January 14, 1983. Heart attack. Peaceful, in his sleep. The doctor said it was quick, painless. I like to think he went knowing he'd finally done right by somebody. The funeral was small. Silas wouldn't have wanted it any other way. But the people who came, they mattered. Penny stood at the graveside, holding that porcelain doll, tears streaming down her face. She'd spent every summer at the estate since that first Thanksgiving, learned to fish in the creek, learned to pitch under the magnolia tree, learned what it meant to have a grandfather who showed up. Beatrice read from the will at the service. Her voice didn't shake. She was steady, like always. Half the estate went to creek restoration, $500,000. The county built a water treatment facility, cleaned the soil, replanted native grasses. Took 3 years, but the creek came back to life. The fish returned in '81. I'll never forget it. Late spring. Midge and I were walking the bank, just checking on things, and there it was, a catfish, big as my forearm, gliding through the clear water like it had never left. Midge dropped to her knees and cried, not sad tears, grateful tears, the kind that come when something you thought was dead forever gets a second chance. She caught her first fish that summer, a 7-pound channel cat. She wanted to keep it, mount it, hang it on the wall, but I told her, baby girl, the point ain't to take, it's to witness. So we threw it back, watched it swim away into the current. That's what Silas taught us. Legacy ain't what you hold on to, it's what you set free. A quarter of the estate went into a trust for Penny's education. She went to Vanderbilt, then law school at University of Tennessee. Smart as a whip, that girl. She works for the county now, land rights attorney, helps families who've been pushed off their property by developers, helps folks who don't have a voice find one. She says it's what her grandpa would have wanted. I believe her. The rest of the estate, well, that's where folks get surprised. Silas left the cottage, the magnolia tree, and 10 acres to me and Midge, put it in writin', signed and notarized. For 20 years of service, the will said, and 1 night of courage. Midge graduated high school in '85, got herself a scholarship to pitch for a small college upstate. But she came back, said the city didn't feel right, said she wanted to stay where the roots were deep. Now she coaches Little League, boys and girls, black and white, rich and poor, doesn't matter to her. She says everyone deserves a chance to throw a strike, to feel what it's like when your arm knows exactly what your heart wants to say. We turned part of the estate into a youth baseball camp. The Silas Thornwood Field of Dreams, Penny named it. Every summer, kids come from all over, some with gloves, some without. Midge teaches them how to pitch, how to stand tall, how to mean it. And every single one of them learns about the creek, how it died, how it came back, how one man's poison became another generation's second chance. Now, Dalton Vance. Never saw him again after that Thanksgiving. Heard through the grapevine he moved to Nevada. Tried his hand at real estate. Failed. Tried again in Arizona. Failed again. Last I heard, he was in a trailer park outside Tucson, drinking himself to sleep every night, still bitter about an inheritance he never earned. Some folks never learn, but Silas, he learned, took him 68 years, took a dead son, a poisoned creek, and a little girl with perfect aim. But he learned, see, legacy ain't about blood. It ain't about how much money you got in the bank or whose name's on the deed. It ain't about the size of your house or the letters after your name. Legacy is about who shows up when you're down and who you show up for when they need you. Silas built an empire with his hands, timber, land, contracts, wealth. But that ain't what people remember. They remember the creek. They remember Penny's smile at graduation. They remember the baseball field where kids learn to throw with purpose. They remember that he changed. And change, well, that's the bravest thing a man can do. They say a man's legacy is what he leaves behind. But I'll tell you what Silas taught me. Legacy is what you leave alive. It's the creek that runs clear. It's the girl who finds her arm. It's the grandchild who feels seen. It's the employee who finally gets called by his name. Legacy is every person who stands a little taller because you chose to bend down. So if this story touched your heart, if you got somebody in your life who showed up when you needed them, or if you showed up for someone else, tell me about it. I'd love to know. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me your story. 'Cause that's what it's all about, friend. Not the money, not the property, not even the glory, just the people, and the courage to let them in before it's too late. Don't wait till you're 68 and alone in a study with a rusted safe you're too scared to open. Start now. Ask the question. Make the call. Knock on the door. 'Cause time don't stop for nobody. and you don't get a second pitch. But if you're lucky, if you're brave, you get a second chance. Silas got his, and he didn't waste it. Fade in, spring. The magnolia tree in full bloom, white petals drifting in the breeze like snow. Camera pans down slowly to reveal a wooden bench beneath it, weathered but strong. A brass plaque catches the sunlight. Silas Thornwood, 1910-1983. He learned to open the gate. On the bench, two baseballs rest side by side. One old and scuffed, leather cracked, Elwood's. One newer, bright white with red stitching, Midge's. The camera pulls back. Beyond the bench, the creek runs clear and bright, sunlight dancing on the water. Wildflowers grow along the banks, yellow, purple, white. In the distance, children's voices, laughter. The sharp crack of a baseball hitting a glove. A little girl winds up on a makeshift mound. Throws, strike. The coach, Midge, older now, cap pulled low, claps her hands. "That's it, baby. Mean it." The girl grins. Winds up again. Wind moves through the magnolia leaves, a sound like whispers, like forgiveness, like time folding back on itself. And somewhere, maybe in memory, maybe in the air itself, Elwood's voice, soft and steady. "Power ain't in the arm, baby girl. It's in the heart. You gotta mean it. Every throw." The camera rises, up through the branches, up past the estate, up into the blue Tennessee sky. The sound of the creek, the sound of the children, the sound of life continuing, growing, changing. Fade to black. One final sound. A baseball spinning through the air. Then thwack, strike.